Thank you for joining us. I'm Ann Merrihew, Director of U.S. Higher Education at AWS. Today, I'm joined by Scott Pulsipher, President, Western Governors University. Western Governors University, WGU, is an online university where students earn an affordable, accredited, career-focused college degree at an accelerated pace. Scott, thank you so much for joining us today. Would you mind starting things off by telling us a little bit about WGU and how the institution has transformed over the years?
Sure, and it's great to be with you, and thank you for letting me be a part of this. It's truly a pleasure. WGU has been in existence now for a little over 20 years. At WGU, we believe in the power of human potential, and we probably also convey our core belief in most of what we do, which is that we believe in the inherent worth and ability of every individual. And we know that, given the opportunity, every person has something big to contribute. And this was at the root of WGU's founding. It was, in fact, founded by the governors of 19 Western states. They recognized that there are too many individuals and residents within their respective states that did not have access to high quality post-secondary education and the pathways to opportunity. And so they recognized that this gap that existed between talent and opportunity was quite wide. And so they wisely, I think, innovated a new private nonprofit institution that became WGU. And for our now over 20 years, we've endeavored to improve quality and expand access and truly optimize student success for every individual that we serve. And so even though we're only 23 years young, we were founded in 1997. Today, WGU serves nearly 125,000 students in all 50 states and also on military bases overseas. More importantly, we just surpassed our 200,000th graduate. And it's truly remarkable to consider kind of the scope and scale that WGU has been able to grow into as we endeavor to make education and opportunity work for everyone.
That's fantastic, Scott. I know I've heard so many meaningful stories of how WGU has made a difference in people's lives. And it truly is an honor to be able to work with you and see the great work that WGU is doing and changing people's lives. I understand that you testified to Congress recently about higher education is coping with COVID. Can you share a summary of the points that you made?
Yeah, that was an interesting experience for sure. As you might imagine, there are many sectors that have been impacted by COVID. And there is little doubt that higher education has been one of those ones that have been impacted quite broadly. And so the event itself on how stimulus funding might be needed to support the higher education sector, and in many ways to address issues of revenue loss for many institutions that now may be struggling with their economics and their budgets. And my testimony essentially said that you're solving for the wrong problem. If we're only going to think about how to create funding and federal stimulus to prop up our legacy model of things, then that would probably be akin to investing in malls in the year 2000. And so my focus of my testimony was really about how do you address many of the pre-existing conditions that existed within higher education? How do you stimulate investment and innovation that's desperately needed to address challenges with affordability, massive equity issues, and arguably less than stellar student outcome measures and student success measures. And so my primary points to the questions I was being asked was, how should the federal government or even state governments or any funding, if you will, direct funding that's desperately needed to drive innovation and the technology that's needed for the future of learning? How do you think about advancing our ability to access and enable the individuals that are poorly served or underserved by traditional models? And so we need to use the pressure, if you will, of the pandemic to kind of catalyze this reinvention of higher education. We truly need to renew higher education as the surest path to opportunity.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I so appreciate your perspective on this. I'm just curious, how do we do that? How do we make education the surest path to opportunity?
Yeah, I think there are some themes surely that WGU could inform there, and I think one of the first and probably the most important one is for education to be the surest path to opportunity. It surely needs to be a path that aligns with that opportunity, and to be more specific about
Mhm.
that we need to think about how learning and the credentials and the outcomes of education, in fact, are relevant and aligned with the future work. We well know that the vast majority of those who matriculate into post-secondary programs, they're doing so that they can find a great first job or even next job, so that they can advance their prospects in their own lives. And so we also need to think about what that looks like in the current environment. When we have this massive challenge of over 15 million Americans who are currently unemployed, and they know that the jobs they have before are not going to be ones that are available for them to go back to. So how do we upskill millions of displaced workers and help them prepare for the new opportunities? This probably, I would say, emphasizes something we often talk about, which is education has to be the pathway for not only the first opportunity, which is what most of us know, first-time full-time students who are 18-year-olds who get their, bachelor's credential or otherwise. But we also have to be thinking about how post-secondary education enables individuals in pursuing their next opportunity. It really advances the notion of a lifelong learner. How does education and work weave together through an individual's life? That this is not one and done model. It's actually a multiple iteration model of life. Lastly, I probably would emphasize that the opportunity, the pathway of education has to work for everyone. If you look at enrollment today, it's surely unbalanced toward individuals of high income households. The attainment rates vary greatly across those different backgrounds. Over the last 50 years, we've seen dramatic, notable increases in attainment rates among the top income quartile of households, but among the bottom income quartile of households, they've remained relatively stagnant. Even if access and enrollment's gone up, the reality is the outcome isn't there yet. And so I think we have to be investing to figure out how to ensure that there is equal probability not only in accessing these education pathways, but also equal probability of outcome. And so how do we think as institutions and those in the sector, how do we think about orienting everything we do and how we deliver it, how we teach, how we engage with students? How do we personalize? This is something Amazon knows well a lot about. Like, how do we personalize the learning so we can dramatically increase the probability that every individual can be successful and then put on their path to their opportunity?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think you brought up a great point there that this is not just about the students who are 18 to 22 years old. This
Right.
is about students who are coming, whatever age they are, back into wanting to learn something new and be productive in the workforce. So it's clear we have big problems. How can higher ed address those?
Yeah, the just on that point too, and there's something that often is not known about enrollment today, that even 40% of the 20 million or so adults enrolled in higher education are over the age of 24. And it's the fastest growing age demographic too. And so this is already happening, even if not all institutions have woken up to that. It is already happening as they see post-secondary education being more critical as not just the first opportunity, but the next rung on the ladder of one's life. So how can higher ed address these? One thing that we often think about is, like, scale does matter. We've in many ways created this sense of false, scarcity, or that somehow we've constrained capacity, and so then we use selective admissions criteria, et cetera. And this would be akin to Amazon saying to the next Prime customer to say, sorry, I just want to let you know, now that you're the 100 millionth and one Prime customer, your service is going to be less than all the 100 million that came before you. Like, that's not true. It's not true in higher education either. So when we're facing issues of inequity or lack of opportunity, like, we do have to address this at quite a large scale. In the US alone, there are 40 to 50 million adults who need access to their next opportunity, and education has to be one of those pathways that they have to think about. The other thing I would say is arguably a mental shift in most of the higher education sector, and I say this as an outsider who's come into higher education. So much of this perception that we have is that higher ed is oriented around the professoriate, the faculty, that it's about advancing research and knowledge, et cetera. When we take a very different approach at WGU, and this is something I think would benefit the sector as a whole, is how do we really put the student at the center of everything that we do? Like, they are the primary customer of higher education. If one of the primary purposes is to transfer knowledge and the skills and capabilities to individuals so they could advance their lives, then that requires us to put the student at the center of everything we do to drive our innovation, the solutions that we come up with. How do we think about leveraging technology? How do we think about faculty engagement? How do we think about content and curriculum design? When you put the student at the center of everything you do, you might redesign things in higher education very differently than they are today.
Yeah, thank you. It's interesting. I'm thinking about what you said about scale and how important that is. And in an article that you authored, this was published by Forbes in July, you said, and I quote, "The higher education sector is in the throes of technology-driven disruption, a disruption irreversibly accelerated by COVID-19." Can you share more about all the ways you're seeing this disruption?
Yeah, that's definitely one of the benefits I have too, is coming into higher education, especially from a technology sector and background, is that technology is a catalyst for innovation and change, and technology is enabling different thinking and different modeling in pretty much every aspect of higher education. You can just look at right now, like, how do we deliver content and learning to students? How do we engage at a one-to-one basis between faculty members and students? How do we think about developing learning management systems and learning environments? How do we connect students and peers that are working at a distance rather than on a campus in a classroom? How do we think about even financial aid, and how do we think about the the engagement of employers or internships? Like, technology is something that can enable pretty much an advancement of the design of everything that we do in higher education. And so technology, interestingly enough, can address major gaps that are affected by things like affordability and cost or equity. But now, for example, distance education or delivering learning online, we start to emphasize too other digital inequities or the digital divide that exists too. And so we can identify how we invest in digital infrastructure to increase access by having high bandwidth internet access in everyone's home, so they can not just shop and bank and everything else, but they can also engage learning and enroll in programs and interact with faculty, et cetera. And so at the end of the day, technology can find solutions for students and design the end-to-end journey in a way that we just didn't think about it before. And that's why it's been so important for us to really rely upon AWS as one of our key technology partners, because when you can instrument the entire journey end to end, you start producing a massive amount of data and content and transactions and all these interactions. You start exposing into a highly technology and data rich environment. Well, you truly then need also a platform that can scale and enable what we need to do with technology.
Yeah, I love the idea of that it's end to end, because that's really akin to what the student is going through. Instead of piecemealing, it really is from the beginning to the end. What is everything they need to be successful? Can you give us a few examples of your technology-driven approach? Where are you seeing this come out? Where does technology help you on that end-to-end platform?
Yeah, maybe two specific things I could think about really quickly. We have this general notion of free the data, because when you're instrumenting everything with technology from the end-to-end student journey, you start producing all of that information. Well, we actually want to free up that data so that we can start analyzing the impacts of different innovations or changes that we make in the student's journey. Everything from the content they use to learn a subject in a course, to how they interact with with faculty in a particular way. And so we've embraced the power of data and metrics. I will share just one anecdote of something I carried with me from my Amazon days into WGU, which is this phrase of, if we can know, we should know. And so that's kind of been this mantra of, like, well, when you have this technology instrumented end-to-end journey, you have to then acquire all the data, do the analysis of it, track the reporting and metrics so that you can actually know whether things are working. So that leads me to the next key point, which is we do utilize technology to run randomized controlled trials. Does this content increasing learning versus this content? Does this sequencing of courses improve progress versus this sequencing of courses? Does this faculty interaction increase, persistence and completion and first time, success on the first assessment? Like, how do we actually know what we're doing is impacting student success? And that's something that with a technology-enabled model that we can advance in a way that a non-tech rich or a analog model would struggle to do. And so you do really need these highly scalable, highly available cloud solutions to rely upon when you're committing to this tech-first approach to designing for students. And so that's, again, back to like utilizing AWS has not only improved our availability and scalability, et cetera, but it's really maximized our ability to adapt to students' needs on a one-by-one basis.
Yeah. I'm fascinated with the fact that with COVID now, so many universities have had to employ technology, whether they want to or not. And I'm wondering, how would you grade higher ed's COVID-driven move online? What should online learning look like?
Yeah. Much of what I think we are seeing in the first iteration of most institutions who've tried to advance an online or hybrid model is that it's something that would be like 15 years ago. We basically said, how do we get at least the broadcast mode working? Because arguably most of what we experienced in a classroom was a lecture model. The lecture was just part of the content we consumed to try to master the subject matter of a particular course. And so most of the initial iterations of that were like, well, how do we turn a lecture on the stage into a lecture online? And we have to go well beyond this broadcast mode, though. High quality online learning and teaching really requires us, or really empowers us to think about things like time. Just think about the nature of how a credit hour model, class-based model worked before, is you had classes scheduled at a certain time. But if now the content can be consumed whenever I want to consume it, or I need to have access to faculty and teaching assistants when I need to have access to teaching assistants, like it now changes the construct of time to favor the individual who's consuming it rather than I have to be at a certain place. We have to think about relationships between individuals very differently, and how to utilize technology to enable study groups and peer-based learning and sharing of notes even, or more importantly, faculty. I often like to talk about faculty role online is kind of like having 24/7 office hours, because you can record your content, but that becomes just consume when you want. It's really about how does the one-to-one teaching happen, and that occurred with TAs and faculty in office hours. Well, you now have to do that at fairly a high rate and making yourself available. So lastly, of course, the data. How do we utilize data in totally new ways? And so if you believe in the mission-driven nature of higher education, then you have to design for that mission as we go into a tech-first mindset or into an online model. So it's one of those things that we're very excited about, how technology is going to enable significant advancements in higher ed that we haven't seen in the last several decades.
Yeah, we're very excited for you, and certainly we want to support that in every way that we can. It's interesting, as much as nostalgia that we have for our past, we as individuals and humans, we've shown our resiliency to invent for our future. How do we embrace this future together?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the first things that I recall having this conversation with someone about whether the technology learning model is better or worse than the kind of in-person learning model, and the reality is that's the wrong question. It's really about how do we leverage technology to enable everything and advance everything. And so I'm trying to think about aspects of my life today that are somehow worse because of tech, when in reality our lives are arguably better today because of technology. It doesn't mean it doesn't come with certain challenges. But think about shopping, think about banking, think about travel, think about even engaging and staying connected with family and peers and friends. Like, there's hardly an example I can think of where technology made things worse. And so I think we have to think about how do we leverage technology to catalyze the disruption and innovation and ultimately the change that we need to bring about so that education is more accessible, it's more equitable, it's more personalized, it's more aligned with the future of work. Like how do we leverage technology? The key question is, how do we leverage technology to advance in any one of those dimensions I mentioned? So we should recognize the way that we used to do things isn't the way we will continue to do things. And so we're the ones that are going to make that change. It's not like we should be sitting around for someone else to do it and then force it upon us. It's how are we proactive about leveraging technology to bring about the change that our students and the workforce and our future society needs from higher education.
Yeah, it's also interesting, isn't it? Because I think that if you talk to any student, the students are expecting it. They see this in their lives and they want it. They're used to it now.
Oh yeah.
So I think it's a call to all of us to be able to meet their needs. And I loved when you said that, just because this is how we did it doesn't mean that's how we should be doing it. So Scott,
Yeah.
I think we can all agree you've given us a lot to think about. I want to thank you for joining me to discuss WGU's transformation and to give your perspective on education amidst a very uncertain fall. We really appreciate your time today.